Hello, U.S. history students, and welcome to the third and final lesson of this week dealing with the Great Depression. Now, this lesson is going to be very, very simple. It's just going to be a list of the hardships caused by the Great Depression, okay? Now, what I would do, again, there's no worksheet or anything that you have to fill out. What I would do is I would do a chart just like you see on the screen. Put hardships of the Great Depression in the center, and then around it, list out the different hardships, okay? And all you have to do is list them. I'm going to give you a little bit of description for each one, but you're not required to write that down, okay? Then be sure you review this as well as the other two lessons on the Great Depression before you take your final quiz on all of this material, okay? Now remember, earlier in the week, we talked, excuse me, earlier in the week, we talked about the 20s, how the roaring 20s were a good period for the United States. We're doing well economically. It's also a period of social change for us. Then 1929, the stock market crashes, and we head into the Great Depression in the 30s. And we spent the first two lessons about the Great Depression talking about the causes and the effects. So now we're going to pick up and just simply list the hardships caused by the Great Depression, okay? Number one, all right, and these are in no particular order. Number one, unemployment, okay? We talked about this. This is a vicious cycle, okay? People aren't spending as much. Banks are running out of money. Banks are closing. People don't have as much money. They don't spend as much. Since they don't spend as much, companies begin to cut back on workers. As those workers lose their jobs or have reduced hours, they have less money, which means they're going to spend less, which means other companies are going to cut back on hours or fire people as well. And it just keeps going on and on and on and on. It's a vicious cycle of unemployment. And here you can see here, these are gentlemen waiting in line to try to get a job. This gentleman right here has the sign, "Who will help me get a job? I do not want charity." And that's something we talked about in a couple of the earlier lessons too, is people wanted to work. In fact, they were willing to move across country to find jobs, and just nothing was happening. In fact, they were getting turned away from cities they were moving to because nobody has any work. So unemployment is a big hardship. And there's some more pictures there. Employment agency line is out the door. There's two more gentlemen. We've seen this photograph before, wanting and this gentleman right here, notice war veteran is on there, okay? War veteran from World War I, all right? But unemployment, very big hardship with the Great Depression. Number two, homelessness and those Hoovervilles, okay? And here's our picture, these shanty towns, okay? These shacks. As people don't have money, they can't afford rent, okay? They can't afford their mortgages, their houses get foreclosed, and they have to put up little shacks. And we talked about the fact that President Hoover, who was president at the beginning of the Depression, gets the blame for it because he doesn't take it as seriously. So these groupings of shacks are known as Hoovervilles because of President Hoover, who was president at the beginning of the Great Depression. And there's some more pictures of the Hoovervilles right there. Number three, soup kitchens and bread lines. There were charity organizations, churches try to help out, Salvation Army tries to help out. Since people, again, are unemployed and they have less money, we're trying to give people basic necessities, okay? So bread, food, milk, that sort of thing. People could come wait in line and get something to eat, all right? But again, this is tied back to the homelessness, the unemployment, the lack of money. All right, and you can see there, this is a great picture here. There's no way like the American way, and notice all this line of people waiting for in a bread line or a soup line. Also notice, okay, this is an interesting one socially. There's no way like the American way. Notice who's in the car, okay, and who's standing in line. All right, so that can bring up some interesting social commentary for the time. Okay, what American way are we talking about? All right, but that's a discussion for another day. Violence towards minorities, all right? We talked about this. The KKK comes back in the 20s because of our open immigration policy. We've talked about the fact that immigrants were often willing to work in dangerous conditions for low pay. We talked about that with industrialization. The same thing is going to happen here. In fact, people are so desperate for work, okay, they are willing to work at just about any condition for any pay, even if it's relatively little, right? And Other workers are going to be offended by that. All right. The fact that you're willing to work for less pay or whatever and taking a job that maybe I could take or maybe I would use just doesn't sit well. And we see violence toward minorities who are willing to do that, work for less pay and often dangerous conditions. Farm foreclosures. Now, this is something we haven't really gotten that much detail about. But while the Great Depression is going on in the Midwest, it's something called the Dust Bowl. And there's a series of bad droughts out in the Midwest. Farms are hit hard. Okay, the ground is drying up, crops are dying. When crops are dying, of course, the farmers can't make any money. You've got all the problems with the Great Depression anyway, and these farmers end up losing their farms, kind of like people end up losing their homes. All right, and you can see here how nasty it is. All right, evacuation cell, furnitures, all must be sold. All right, but the same thing is happening to farmers in the Midwest because of this condition known as the Dust Bowl. All right, broken families. We often don't think about that, but this often happens. You have mom and dad leave trying to find work, even if it means going to a different state to try to find work, and they leave the kids with grandparents, or maybe even, and this was happening to my family, as a matter of fact. My grandfather and his sister were possibly going to have to be put in an orphanage because their father could not take care of them. All right. So families are broken up as people are looking for work. All right. And we can see that, like I said, the little kids. Now, this family's lucky because it looks like everybody's staying together as they move west. But here, probably a grandchild here being left with the grandparents while mom and dad are out looking for work. Multiple generations there, one family. Notice mom's missing there. Here you can see really the poverty of the children and the mom there. So families are taking a toll with all these hardships as well. Poor health care for children. All right. Again, this is something we don't think about. With lack of money, healthcare is going to be difficult for everybody. But sometimes when it comes down to it, who needs to get the health care first? Mom and dad who are going to be working, or the kids? All right. So there's poor health care for children. Now, clinics are set up. I mean, we can see here, okay, free clinics are set up to try to get kids shots and medication and everything. But still, it's going to be very, very difficult with lack of money for kids to get properly medicated and get properly cared for. All right. And like I said, if it depends on who's getting the care, is it the parents who are working or the kids who aren't? The parents are probably going to get the money set aside for health care. Schools closed. Okay. This is an interesting one. All right. Because families are in transition and families are broken up, and possibly because of lack of money at home, kids stop going to school. And if kids stop going to school, then there's not a need for teachers and principals and things like that. So schools end up closing again because people are out there looking for work, and because families are getting broken up, people are moving out of state, moving out of the community, moving from place to place looking for jobs. Right? And we can see here, I mean, this is both of these pictures interesting. Everybody is put in one room, okay? The entire school is put in one room, both white children and African American children, okay? And then last but not least, an increase in suicide. We talked about the general demoralization of the time. People are looking for work and they can't find work, which is very, very hard for them. Families are getting broken up. The idea that you're losing your house or your farm, which you've worked so hard for, the fact that you can't take care of your family because you have no money and people are going to soup kitchens and bread lines, that's very, very demoralizing. And when people get demoralized and they don't see a way out, like I said, there's a lot of cycles here with the Great Depression, and they don't see a way out. Tragically, some people decide to take their lives. So we see an increase in suicide caused by the Great Depression as well. And you can see here in these pictures just this feeling of demoralization from these people suffering during this period of time. Well, those are the main hardships caused by the Great Depression. Okay. Again, be sure you review these notes, review the other two presentations on the Great Depression, and then take that little quiz. That little quiz has a lot of charts and gets you to make inferences based on what we talk about. So watch those charts and pay attention to the questions that are being asked. Be sure you review before you take it, or it's going to be real difficult.